It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to introduce this topic of global health. What I'm going to try to do is to talk about its importance to neurosurgery and neurosurgery's unexpected importance in global humanitarianism. I'll use some personal examples, but I'll also begin to give an idea of what I think the present situation is and a path to the future. I'm happy to say that neurosurgery is now beginning to think globally. This may not be true of the rest of the country, but very much in neurosurgery it is. And it's very important because the worldwide disparities in medical care, which I grew up being told could only be addressed by internists or infectious disease doctors, are far greater in specialties like neurosurgery. On the left is my OR in Madison, on the right is an OR in South America. And this goes on and on and on. And I started with humanitarian neurosurgery 4 decades ago, working in the Appalachian region of the United States. I discovered the tremendous benefits to myself of doing this, the people I associated with, the work I did, and the service I did. But I was always concerned that it was falling short of lasting impact. And that's very important because 3 decades ago, I was asked to join Global Neurosurgery Group working in Guatemala. And that example really set the stage for a lot of what I will talk about. Tremendous personal fulfillment, but minimal lasting impact. I did, however, realize as I served that there are several lessons. One, these countries of the developing world are urbanizing. People are moving to the capital. 25 million in one city, the next largest city is 80,000. That means a complete disruption of the distal medical system, the regional distribution of food, transportation, patients. It's a big problem for healthcare. Second, disruption by civil war. Unfortunately, I was teaching during the time of the Guatemalan Civil War, time of great difficulties, and your impact was always changed by a changeover in government or a threat to the people you educated. This became one of the lasting things. But during that time, I met this young lady, and this is the actual lady that changed my life. She's a small child in Guatemala selling fruit. I had seen over 100 patients that day. I was proud of myself, but I need not have been. And I saw her, and she was healthy. And I said, I won't be back to this city for a long time. Who will care for her when I'm not there? And then I began to stop and say, what do I really do well? And at that time, I realized 3 decades ago, I was good at training doctors, training surgeons. So I began to change my own philosophy toward training surgeons toward a self-sustaining system. And that meant moving to other countries which weren't beset by war. Because when you do that, you understand that training neurosurgeons takes resources, takes time, but that's the way we make a lasting impact. And it became very clear to me that I needed collaboration. I needed volunteers among that society that were invested in it succeeding. I needed a government that would succeed. I could not do it alone. And that was a big shift from my personal service and personal fulfillment to what impact was being done. And that led to understanding the issue. When you do not have a neurosurgeon in a country of 1 million or more, and that's 25 countries in the world, or you have some countries where one neurosurgeon serves 11 million people, it means you have no neurosurgery, which means you have no trauma system, which means you do not take full care of cancer. You do not take care of stroke in this modern world, and their trauma system collapses. Pediatric care for the congenital anomalies we care about collapses, and nothing progresses. Yet, when I began to understand that, the impact of even one neurosurgeon working in that country continuously could change everything. And that became really the epiphany. Because although I spent 3 decades preaching this, it became reality only 5 years ago when the Lancet Commission and World Bank studied this issue and said the essential surgeries of the world, the surgeries that will take a person and return them to health and productivity, are absent for 5 billion people in the world. And that access to essential surgery is as important a human right as access to water, freedom from war, or access to antibiotics. Because Absent that, do you have any idea how many people died of Ebola last year? About 1,800. Do you know how many people died because they did not have access to essential surgery? 47 million. And once that became clear, everything changed. And the World Health Organization said this must be our priority. And they began looking for how do we train surgeons in their own country so they will stay. If we ship them to England to train, they'll stay in England. If we go there and do the service for them, the government will never adopt this. So that led to the Foundation for International Education. For 5 decades, this is the 51st anniversary of FEANS, founded by neurosurgeons to serve neurosurgical need worldwide. And when I was doing my work on service through education in South America, they asked me to join, and then gradually asked me to be secretary and now chair. And over the last 2 decades, I've been moving this from service to education. And it is an organization of partners. These are neurosurgeons and their patients and their families and their friends who want to address neurosurgical need through education to self-sustaining. And that means partnership, because nobody does that alone. That means a relatively safe society. That means equipment, materials. That means volunteers that are willing to be present and go and work side by side. And that means training people of that own country to take ownership of their healthcare system. It emphasizes curriculum, certification, milestones. These are the things we do well in the United States. The Senior Society, or Society of Neurological Surgeons, is in charge of everything about the education of neurosurgeons, the residency, the milestone, the curriculum, the testing, the postgraduate testing. Well, I'm the past president of that organization, so I was able to influence them to allow us to take these lessons worldwide. And so we do, and that becomes what we do as an organization and what I think is the path forward for neurosurgery. Because service alone is non-sustainable. But when you can have a country or a region that buys into, this is what we need, we'd like you to help provide it, we can develop those partnerships. And the most important lesson I learned, this was in Ecuador, was that when it became their program, the Ecuadorians' program, and we were the helpers who would come and provide equipment and how to maintain it, they took ownership, it became self-sustaining. And that's probably the most important lesson. The talents we bring are presence, repeated, educational emphasis, and equipment, and most importantly, how to maintain that equipment. Believe me, when I get off the plane, nobody cares about the chairman of neurosurgery. They want to see the biomed person or my daughter, who is far more useful to them than I am, and that's true. And this is my wife teaching me how to clean my own equipment, which is an important lesson. The equipment is important. You learn quickly that most of the doodads that we use are unnecessary. Useful minimal equipment and how to use it teaches me to be a better surgeon. People say, why don't you ever lose blood on your cranies, Dr. Dempsey? Well, in Africa, there's no blood to give. I better have techniques and train people to repair it. This is my daughter standing in front of the glove drying rack in Ambato, Ecuador. She was fascinated by this, but reusable is the way the world works. We're teachers. If you begin to succeed in that and you are there to teach, they come. People drive across Africa in buses because we're giving a course in one corner of the country. The students came across South America because we're going to be there and teaching. And I would just say, not I want to teach you this, I have these ideas, but rather, what do you want to learn? Teach me. And it would be, I want to learn how to read a scan. I want to learn what is a scan, how do I do it? How do you do this technique? How do you stop blood loss? What is bleeding? Or finally, on a very good day, the student said, how do you throw a curveball? And so that was my best lecture, I'll point out. So what do? Initiatives for FEANS now are multiple partners. Certification curriculum, that means we partner with the Senior Society and the AANS. Materials, drills, and equipment. fantastic man by the name of Scott Robertson, working for the World Federation of Neurosurgical Societies, has worked with these companies to supply equipment at cheap prices that our philanthropists help to pay for. And we volunteer in education. And we move beyond the U.S., Asia, Europe, etc., for volunteers. And that means that we begin to understand that neurosurgeons do not work in a vacuum. Infrastructure, neuropathology, neuroradiology, ICU training. We're setting up a program just as you set one up in your own hospital, and just how you cultivated the really talented people that you need around you. And I learned this. I learned that I don't need all the fancy equipment. My table in Madison is now clean and efficient and works faster because I know what I need. And we learned about what is infrastructure. This gentleman on the left is a very important person in my life because I had spent a great deal of time teaching surgeons in Central Africa to do benign brain tumors or to do tumors on children. And at the end of that period of time, we gathered in the pediatric cancer ward, and the children sang to us in Swahili, tears running down your face. It was beautiful. But the nurse came to me and said, they're all going to die. I said, what? What? Where? They said, we have no chemotherapy program. I said, I'm an American, I'll get you the chemotherapy. And she said, you don't understand. And this would be a constant theme, as she quietly told me, you don't understand, because I wasn't asking, what do you need? And she said, we have no neuropathologists in Central Africa. We have no idea what you took out. I'd never thought of that. So I walked down the hall, asked the head of pathology, you got a young assistant professor who doesn't mind traveling? Because while I bring a doctor to the U.S., he can only observe me. Pathologists don't touch patients. So we have a black market, don't tell anybody, program in Madison, Wisconsin. We now have neuropathology and chemotherapy throughout Central Africa. And then equipment comes. You begin to teach surgeries that I was told were impossible to do in Central Africa. Baloney. This is the first aneurysm in that region being done. My trainee last year did 11, and perfectly, excellent results in Central Africa, not in the capital. This has changed everything. Because as this develops, we began to develop another concept, that is dyads. I will take a program in the developed world, in Spain, in New York, in Madison, in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'll bring them to pair with a program that wishes to develop in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Myanmar, Nicaragua. And then they will know I will be coming a couple times a year. I'll bring the equipment, but you tell me what you need. I'll find it refurbished. Or you can come up and observe us as you finish your education. And that will put a gold star on you back home. And by my presence, I will show your government, your church, your leaders, your volunteers, this is important. And that really became important. So Fiends developed programs, as you will hear about, in Kathmandu, in India, before they changed names of the cities, in East Africa. And East Africa has really been our emphasis for the last 15 years. In the year 2000, there were 400 million people in the region of Central Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, with nobody being trained in neurosurgery. All service was a couple of people that had been trained and stayed to work because of family ties. Minimal impact. And what we began to work with is develop a training program, the first multinational training program in the world, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Tanzania, certified by the local general surgery certification, which expanded to neuro, a curriculum borrowed from the Senior Society, Society of Neurological Surgeons of the U.S., equipment, supplies, drills from our own hospitals or from arrangements which we had made with the equipment companies and volunteers. What happened is by 2007, the Kenyan government approved they would pay for the residents if we would help train them. This was local buy-in. This is what we needed. And then regionalizing it. We began to do regional clinics outside of the capital, in Mombasa, in Nyeri, in Kisumu, in these major cities of millions of people with no care, so that they would get used to what neurosurgery was, and there we would cite the graduates. and the graduates would be supported, accepted. And this became really a major feature of the program, so that one-on-one we began to develop online communication with the dyads. These are things I don't understand, but my residents do. And they said, if we're going to really adopt the program, let's be in constant communication. We can even look into their OR and give them advice during the case. This way we maintain that communication. And then take it further. What about Asia? What about the volunteers in Korea, Japan, China? Formalize that and start to make it an international organization, not just North Americans. What about this idea of twinning? In twinning in Uganda first and now Kenya, we began to develop secondary sites. People we trained in Uganda are now associate and assistant professors at the second university, the second city, and they are training there. That's self-sustaining. And that means that that system has health care, it has trauma system, it has cancer system throughout the country. Ecuador became self-sustaining, and frankly, I don't travel there anymore. They come to see us and tell us what they're doing with their educational programs. They're presenting at the international meetings. They're now self-sustaining. Other governments began to buy in because we can't do this alone. I need a fairly stable government, and I need a freedom from war, and I need their buy-in. This is the day on the left when the president of Tanzania promised 15% of his budget to healthcare if we worked on all of healthcare, not just neurosurgery, because I was lecturing that neurosurgery was integral to the whole system of trauma, of surgical care, of cancer, of pain, of pediatric congenital anomalies. He's been good to his word. That's better than the governor of Wisconsin, I'll point out. This is the first time I had Zeiss's fanciest microscope. I was setting up in Dar es Salaam. I had to go back and convince my hospital to buy one for me. He's now built a neurosurgery center for training. The other societies that we all belong to, they all have in their charter, we are dedicated to humanitarian care. I've called their bluff. So the AANS is providing web services, the Senior Society curriculum, the materials from the CNS, and the World Federation of Neurosurgical Societies, wonderful educational courses on training doctors after they've finished their residency. They were holding them in St. Petersburg. Not a big need there, guys. And we've been redirecting them to Mombasa, to Neri, etc., with wonderful results. This is Zanzibar. Our European colleagues said, we want to twin and adopt this. Where all I'm trying to do is to develop a curriculum, they said, we'll build a hospital. So, I mean, what we do pales in comparison to our colleagues. These are Fiends board members who took the top right, which was the old hospital, and built the new one. And now we staff it. We succeed when it becomes ownership by the local governments, now 20 different sites around the world, Asia, North and South America, Africa, and we're working on Eastern Europe, but that's starting. We have difficult sites, Zimbabwe and Haiti. These are my hardest, because trying to get the government stable and supportive has been the problem. But in Zimbabwe, we have this infrastructure of young doctors who have said, it's changing, we're staying, please come. So we've come, we've helped them set up their residency. Maintaining it will be difficult. The goals require all of these societies, and they've all worked together, and I'm proud of that, very, very proud of that. Each of the societies you belong to have taken a part. It could be financial, it could be content, it could be volunteerism, but that's really been important. My job is to make sure it can be done safely. And then we begin to think about what comes after a residency. In the U.S., we do the boot camps. We do the ongoing courses. We do neurobiology courses. Why not raise the developing world to that standard, not dummy anything down? So we did. In 2015, the first boot camp held outside the U.S. took place in Bolivia. I learned so much. I sat and watched the Bolivians teach. and told them, you're wonderful at this. You need to do this. They started their own teaching institute for neurosurgery so that this would be ongoing. We took it to Africa. And in Africa, and I don't want to offend anybody, but we put on this in Africa, and there were so many of our trainees, now over 100, coming throughout the continent there. And I made every group of African neurosurgeon teach. And each of them came up to me and said, I didn't know that faction could teach so well. And it would be on racial or ethnic or religious basis. And I said, yes, they're very good. You should spend more time with them. 5 minutes later, the other group would come up and say, I didn't know those people could teach so well. Yes, you should work together. And it became more and more evident that we're all in it together. We began to decentralize care in Uganda, now to 3 sites, and working on 12. We did the first boot camp in Asia, in Myanmar, and 2 months from now, we'll be in Vietnam, again, specializing and showing what can be done. Our challenges remain. Nothing worse than a government overthrow or an unrest. I will have to pull volunteers out. I've had bad experiences myself if I was there. I don't want anybody to be at risk. We are trying to improve things. And a very important objective now, we are working to train the people that have finished, the same way you're trained, postgraduate education, equipment, infrastructure, partnering. This is a trainee who finished in Africa, is starting the first academic program in West Cameroon. To obtain that, he needed to come to Madison to learn what it is to be an academic, to teach, to write, to what is clinical research. And that funding came from Dick Bassett, who is a philanthropist who matches his funding. We gave 7 Bassett Fellows out for this sort of finishing last year. We hope to do 14 this coming year. The Clack family has now donated funds for people that are going to have to interrupt their training in Africa for lack of funds so they can be continued. Very substantial. AANS does this, NIH does this. Equipment. Scott Robertson has gotten the prices down to where our philanthropists can equip an OR for as little as $26,000. A very hard wired drill and microscope that works. Some of the fine instruments, we maintain them, they last. The key role of dyads in doing that, and the key role of government support. This is one of the most important things, to show that the community accepts the new graduate. This gentleman on the right, third from the left, is the newest graduate in Mombasa. 4 million people being served that had no service before. We didn't just send him there. We inaugurated his program at the hospital. We brought worldwide experts. We made sure the minister, the church, the local volunteers knew that his work was important, and we continue to support him with volunteers so that he can stay and it can grow. So what becomes stable? If doctors can sustain themselves. We have to make sure they can make a living there, and that means negotiations with the government. That's what I do. Just as I negotiate with the ministers of health about the importance of neurosurgery, and the continuing education programs make it obvious to them. This continues on. I've learned the importance of volunteering, the importance of collaboration, and the reason is because of this quote. And this is really a why do you do this? This is Harvey Cushing. If a doctor's life be not a divine vocation, then no life is a vocation and nothing is divine. What I'm talking about is restoring in ourselves this idea of why did we go into neurosurgery in the first place? What's noble about our profession? And how much I get out of this. I'm very aware of that. I help other people by doing what I do. That's simple. That's not even work. What have I learned? I've learned some very important things because all of us are overwhelmed with our everyday work. We don't think we can quite carry it out. How can you do this? And the answer is do what you love. I love to teach people, and so I took that worldwide. Many of us started, as I did, I just want to serve. We want to be like Schweitzer. We want to be like Dooley. But what I learned is that service alone doesn't last. The developing world is full of clinics which have been abandoned. Or Haiti, the doctors say, well, the Americans are going to come and provide the food. We don't need to grow our own. We destroyed the farming of Haiti, and we could destroy the medicine of Haiti. So I went there to say, let's start an educational program. And what I learned is that my former partner, Ben Worf, MacArthur Genius Award, he went to Uganda and formed a hospital that trains doctors this very day. And that's the way to go. He was my partner in Kentucky. So now we have literally hundreds in training or completing their training in Central Africa. Second lesson, don't assume you know what other people need. My correct term is be quiet and listen, but what I really say is shut up and listen. We go there, you think you read the Lancet report, you know what they need. Baloney. These local doctors are brilliant. What they do with limited resources, the more I learn, and then they say, get us a drill, or could you teach us this? Absolutely. I'll bring my spine, my laparoscopic specialist, and we'll learn how to do this together. Because when you stop and listen, you learn. I learned this, fortunately, the easy way. I was in the upper Amazon, and I thought I knew what they needed. I was talking to the local minister and said, what's your biggest need here? I thought I knew it. He looked at me in the eye and said, more dugout canoes to bring the patients into the clinic. I said, I never thought of that one. So shut up, listen, is what I do. And very little education takes place in a war zone. We are not doctors without borders. They are valuable in service, but we're looking for lasting. This man on the right has just stuck an M1 rifle through my clinic. Now, believe me, nothing focuses your neuro exam more than an M1 rifle. But I knew I could not get a sustaining program there until their government improved. And yet, your trainees, you're responsible for. The lady in the middle is my favorite resident in the world because she's from Niger. She's becoming the first female neurosurgeon in Niger. And when I asked her, what's your biggest fear? She didn't say lack of equipment or I won't. She said Boko Haram, a group that's dedicated to her death. So I told my residents, you have no problems. I've got no problems. We're supporting her. And that means I have to be careful about them. Sometimes you have to think on your feet. I once got my way out of a very tight jam when I was foolish enough to be in a war zone by putting on a juggling show for the soldiers. They figured I'm either harmless or crazy and let me go. But it was a good thing to learn in med school is how to juggle. Progress comes from partnership with the government, with the societies, but most all with the people you serve. And you do that by being present and asking what are your needs. And then we have the ability to do that. There are many threats along the way. My biggest concerns are illness. My volunteers have to take their shots and clean water, etc. I don't want any other episodes where 18 volunteers get sick in one day. That's tough. Transportation, who's driving is important. The University of Wisconsin had a van full of students on a medical trip hit by a train. I want to know who's driving them. Second, natural disaster. Third, not really that important. This is a volcano erupting outside the hospital I'm operating on. When you finish the case and say, how's the service, they say, not bad, we think the lava is going to flow the other way. It focuses your thoughts a lot. But mostly I care about the people we care for. This is my daughter. In spite of my best efforts, she and I ended up in a tight jam once. I got her out of it, but it changed my life. So it's important. We care about people, we look and listen, we use education, and we're responsible for a wide variety of people, including our own families. Because what we're really talking about is finding that professionalism, nobility of this thing we love called neurosurgery. And we understand that we benefit far more than anybody else, and that's a wonderful thing because all this work, everything you do, how do you bring these lessons to your everyday practice? By having the same attitude that it only makes sense if it makes a better world for the care of your patients, the ones in your hometown and the ones worldwide. So that's really my story. That's the story of Fiends. and I really thank you for this. We're fiends.org online. Thanks so very much.